Okay, today's Friday, May 8th. Today I wanted to look at a example of an essay on poetry from a few semesters ago. A few students have reached out to me saying they didn't know really what direction to go in with regard to their first short essay on poetry, essentially on Black Aperture, right? That's due midnight on Monday. So next week, beginning of next week. So I thought it would be handy to look at a student essay example written by an actual student a few semesters ago, as I just said. And it's an okay essay. It's not a stellar essay. I would put it mid-range, maybe a low B. And we're gonna look at it, and we're gonna figure out what are some of the areas that could be lauded, and you know that it could be celebrated, and some of the areas that are imprecise and that need work. And I think this will help a lot of individuals. And maybe we're along the way we're talking about also thesis statements, what you could possibly write about, because it's wide open. The With regard to what you actually want to argument on behalf of, and think about it that way. Maybe it's easier to wrap your head around the idea and work within the framework that this all these short essays and the final essay are argumentative in nature. Uh, you're going to pick a topic. You're going to look at your text, which in this case is Black Aperture, and you can do a number of things. You can pick a few poems out of the actual text, out of the collection of poetry, and you can argue that and this is the easiest approach, I believe. You can argue that these poems are related because they do the same thing with regard to elements of poetry. Remember the lecture I gave on elements of poetry? And I'm going to email everybody the actual Word document with the elements of poetry. I think that'll be easier than having to go back and actually listen to the lecture again. So you can pick a few things off of that list of elements of poetry, right? You can say, well, I believe Matt Rasmussen within his collection of poetry, Black Aperture, is employing a number of elements of poetry to include imagery, metaphor, simile, um, concrete versus abstract language. You can pick anything off of the 40. Just you have to argument on behalf of those things. Then you go to the text. You go to those poems that you picked from Black Aperture, and you pull excerpts out that demonstrate that he's employing X, Y, and Z, right? And then that's your primary source, right? And then you'd have to reach out um, to Google or the databases or library or magazine articles or literary articles. Or magazine articles, newspapers, right? And then you would have to find other people corroborating what you're saying, which is not as hard as one might think if you've done any research. And I believe to be in this class you have to some extent. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the essay example. I'll pull it up here on the screen and see what is good and what is not so good within this essay. Okay, this student within my class a few semesters ago, as I said, chose to. We covered the. It was English 203, so in this class, within the class, the framework of the class, we cover a number of texts. But the first one we start out with is poetry. We move on to novel and then on to drama, so we cover a play as well. So the book that I chose to cover with regard to poetry was The Simple Truth by Philip Levine, a very famous poet. Uh, Lived till he's a few years ago, was a poet laureate in the United States, died of natural causes in his mid 80s. But in 1995, he won the Pulitzer Prize, the highest literary award you can get, for his collection of poetry, The Simple Truth. And let's bear in mind too, I just want to reiterate, books are italicized. The title of books are italicized. Individual poems are quotation marked. That's going to become important, especially with this example that we're going to show. And these are points taken off. This is all MLA, right? Modern Language Association dictates these things. Just try to bear that in mind. Okay, so you can see what we have here is a seemingly well formatted, with regard to MLA, essay. 2 to 3 pages long. I think this individual student, it was a he did 3 pages, so he did the minimum. Um, so we can see here your name, so student name, corresponding to your last name, top right hand corner with the page number. That advances every page. My name, the class that we're in this case it was English 203, and then the date, formatted with the day, the completely written out month, and then the completely written out enumerated year. Then one space, and then we get the title. And there's a problem here. You could see it's wonky. There's too much spacing. You can see it's much different. It's a little more spacing here than we have between each line, right? But this is correct. This is double spaced. And we get the first paragraph, which should distill down to a thesis statement. And he sort of does, this student, but it's not a precise thesis statement. In fact, there's some errors within it. So let's go ahead and read the first paragraph. That should really set up the situation, what you're going to talk about, give maybe some background information of the poet or his or her collection, right? In this case, with Matt Rasmussen, it's a he, and with Black Aperture. But this individual wrote on The Simple Truth, what we just looked at, that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1995. So Philip Levine's The Simple Truth. In daily life, well, here we go. The title is Accepting Truth. Your title should speak towards the content of your essay. In daily life, people are often predisposed to overcomplicating simple decisions. In the poem, The Simple Truth by Philip Levine, the narrator provides their idea of the simplicity of life. Okay, that's a fine sentence. Good opening, or two sentences. It's a fine opening. I'm not 100% sure where he's going towards. I get that he mentions simple and simplicity twice, and I know he's talking about the simple truth right here, so he's trying to relate real life to the portrayed life within the poetry. And notice the mistake he made with the italicized. Now, the book of poetry is called The Simple Truth, but there also is a poem within The Simple Truth called The Simple Truth. And he's talking about the poem. In the poem, The Simple Truth. So this should have been not italicized. It should have been plain text with quotation marks around it. The narrator tells their personal story about the experience that they've had in their lifetime. That's fine. Withholding information has potentially led to a horrid ending to their life. Similarly, in Mirror Image by Lena Coakley, the protagonist goes through essentially a new life because she can't accept the truth. As humans, people usually run the truth, I'm not sure what that means, and are unable to face the truth. They need to accept the truth quickly if they wish to have a peaceful life. All right, so he's comparing The Simple Truth, the poem The Simple Truth, to another piece of literature. I'm guessing poetry. He could have pointed out Mirror Image by Lena Coakley is a book. It looks like it's a book. I don't know if it's a poetry or some genre of literature. It looks like it's a book because he italicized Mirror Image, right? Books are italicized. They could have set this up by telling us within Lena Coakley's a collection of poetry or her novel or whatever it might have been, memoir, creative nonfiction, short story. Just point out, be precise. And then as humans, people usually run the truth. Should have caught that on his revision, right? Going back and proofreading his own work. Unable to face the truth. They need to accept the truth quickly if they wish to have a peaceful life. So they need to accept the truth quickly if they wish to have a peaceful life. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure the rest of these. He could have been more precise and more forward and declare at this point in his thesis statement, this essay is going to address how people need to accept the truth quickly if they wish to have a peaceful life, much like Rasmussen does by employing X, Y, and Z, right, within his collection of poetry, Black Aperture. I think that would have been much more precise. It would have given a great summary of what he's about to say within his essay, and he would springboard off of that thesis statement into the first body paragraph, and I would know exactly what this essay was going to be about. I think that's where it falls short right off the bat, is in precision within the actual thesis statement. Okay, here we have the first body paragraph. Let's go ahead and read it, and we'll point out some of the good things and some of the problems. In The Simple Truth, so he's talking about the book, I'm guessing, because it's italicized again. The narrator goes through a hardship with someone they hold near to their heart. So now I realize he's being very specific. He's talking about the poem. So he needed to quotation mark The Simple Truth to show that's the poem and not the book. You won't have a problem with Black Aperture because there isn't a poem within the collection called Black Aperture. So whenever you speak about Black Aperture, you would italicize it. And then every poem would be quotation marked, whatever poem you're speaking about. Due to them not being able to tell the truth, they seem to dwell in the past quite frequently. So them, he means narrator or individuals, narrator or speaker or characters within the poetry. I would have, after frequently right here, I think he should have put a colon or a comma, and then that sets up the quote that he's pulling from the actual text from The Simple Truth, the book. Quote, it is onions, and then we get ellipses. He's jumping time within the poem. It stays at the back of your throat like a truth. Here's a stanza break. You uttered. He's jumping time again with the ellipses. and then end the quote. And you can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of poetry, and it doesn't look like that. It looks like 2 lines. I would say this needs to be revised. I would just write out all 4 lines. Here, do a block quote. Remember, we need to do a block quote if we have 3 lines of poetry, or no, 4 lines of poetry or more, and just write it out. Write the whole thing out so it reads like poetry on the page. When you have these ellipses, these jumping of time, this omission of information, it doesn't make sense to me. So it is onions. It stays at the back of your throat like a truth you uttered. So end quote. This is properly formatted. End the quote. Then give me the line, the range of lines within the parentheses. Right. I know it's Philip Levine. You don't have to put Levine here because when we're talking about the simple truth, you could put Levine space then the line range 27 to 31. In that simile, which it is a simile, at the back of your throat like a truth, the author is making a comparing between, so we need some revision here, a comparing between onions and the feeling of the truth. So a comparison between onions and what could be perceived as truth. It seems as though there was bothering them. All right, so this we're slowly losing the ability to argument, right, with the language, right? So points are being deducted because I don't see this individual didn't spend a lot of time sort of excavating what this actual essay is going to be about. Many people struggle with their lives because they were not able to bring themselves to tell the truth. As such, they have made their lives considerably more difficult. However, their life was not always this way. Making great leaps here about just generalizations about people's lives, right? It's not a tight argument. Quote, and I would have set this up again with a colon or a comma. I think a colon works best to set up any quote. I bought $1.50 worth of small red potatoes, ate them for dinner with a little butter and salt. All right. Again, just write out the lines, 3 lines of poetry or 2 lines of poetry instead of jumping time with the ellipses. These stanzas display imagery where they enjoy eating a simple meal where they can relax in their own house. This was before they had to tell the secret. They were able to enjoy the simplicity of their life. He put if their life. So this really could have benefited just from writing the essay, trying to format it properly, walking away from it, and then coming back and then enter the revision process. Just keep rereading it, correcting the ifs that should be ofs, the comparing that should be comparison, the italicized individual poem when it should be quotation marked. The narrator enjoys using the potatoes as symbolism. Good. Now we're getting elements of poetry where they symbolize the basis of a simple life and how something like that can be ruined. Good. So now he's really getting to the gist of what the essence of what the simple truth is about, right? This symbolism, and he's using the narrator, the poet, as one. They're using potatoes, the simplicity of just eating potatoes and butter, as the simplicity of life, right? It's symbolic of that. So now this student is really starting to make sense with regard to their argumentation. It took them to the end of the first body paragraph to get there, though. We want to get there much sooner, hopefully. Okay, so here we go. Let's look at more body paragraphs and see how precise. How is this individual student reaching back, continuing to reach back to their thesis statement? And their thesis statement was imprecise, if you remember. So it's hard to know if they are reaching back to that. Thesis statement is your way of staying focused within your essay, right? And my way of looking back at the thesis statement to see if you're staying on track. So in the short story Mirror Image, a girl goes through a major change in her life as well as the people around her. So there's some problems there. A girl goes through major change in her life, and the people around her change, or they go through a major change. I'm not sure what he's trying to say here. So imprecision again. I get the gist of what the student's attempting to say, but I think there's some imprecision with language, the formatting of the pronouns, really, what they're reaching back to. So now we understand it's a short story. Remember before when this student introduced in the opening paragraph, the introductory paragraph, Mirror Image, we didn't know what it was. Was it a novel? Was it a book of poetry? It's italicized, so it seems like it's a book of some sort, not a poem. But now we get it that it's a short story. That should have been revealed to us early on, right? The first time he mentioned a mirror image. In comparing these two texts, that's fine. Compare these two texts. That's a great thing. Compare to literature. Compare the simple truth, either the book or the individual poem, to something else, right? And then tell us how they're either alike or different. And that's great. That's fine. This is a secondary source, by the way, too. The Simple Truth would be his primary source. The Mirror Image, the short story, would be a secondary source. Goes through a major change in her life as well as the people around her. Young Alice woke up from a transplant in a body that was not her own. Through the course of the short story, she is unable to grasp the simple fact that her body was unsalvageable, and the one she has now was from a donor. Uh, okay, he's setting up the plot of this short story. He's accessing some of the language of the Simple Truth, namely simple. So he's trying to tie those together. Um, unsalvageable, great verbs, so torquing the verbs. And we talk about torquing verbs with regard to poetry, but you got to do it within your own essays too, right? It shows that you have strong action verbs, right? You're leading the reader down the strong action verb path. There's great precision when you use action verbs as opposed to the fact that her body was not usable, right? Would be weaker than unsalvageable. She had remained distant from her loved ones. However, she was not the only one that was affected. The parents of the donor body, plural, or sorry, possessive S would have been better, donor's body, have tried to revive the girl that was once in the body. Quote, so again, set the quote up with a comma or a colon. Quote, my wife, she thinks our daughter is still alive, but I know. So Coakley, page 6, that's great. That's perfectly formatted. As tough as, so by the time we get to the end of this paragraph, he has to tie this into the Simple Truth. As tough as reality may be for the couple, they came to the realization that their daughter was no longer with them. While the father walked away knowing the truth, so he's connected it again, the simple right here, truth right here, I see what he's doing, it's good, it's working for me. He seemed to be at peace knowing the truth instead of pondering for all of eternity. The short story refers to the body many times, showing that their life would be never again be simple. Would be so major problems here with regard to formatting the sentence. It was rushed. He didn't go back and revise. It's imprecise. I'm not 100% sure what it's saying, and he didn't bring it back to the poetry, the Simple Truth. I'm beginning to think this essay. I'm rethinking this now. That this essay is probably in the C range, the high C. In the poem The Escape, the narrator explains that their life has become very complex in a short time frame. So The Escape, I know that's, because I teach it, is from The Simple Truth, the collection of poetry, The Simple Truth. But he needs to not believe that his audience knows everything that he knows, right? This person who wrote this essay, the student. So just point out where The Escape came from, who wrote it, right? Another poem by Philip Levine within the collection The Simple Truth is The Escape, where the narrator explains that their life has become very complex in a short time frame. Would have been much more precise. It appears as if though the narrator was not originally American. So some problems here, revision. I know what the student is attempting to say, but it appears as if though the narrator was not originally American. It needs to be revised. The narrator is also not able to let go of the past. They have been through a mentally draining and depressing past. However, the narrator shows aspects that they keep dwelling on the past rather than moving forward with life. All right, so we get a quote, much better set up by instead of a full stop, needs to be set up, as I said before, by a colon or a comma. Quote, he jumps time with the ellipses, that's okay. With rain, the first few drops filling my eyes, that day's rain falling hours later from the leaves above. All right, so we get the line range, so that's fine. The narrator's past, very impactful on their current life. So their narrator's past, it was or is very impactful on their current life, although it would be best if they learned to let go. And then hopefully this line gives credence to how it'd be best if they let go. Colon or comma here. Quote, my beautiful literature teacher, Miss Hardman, who had a secret love for me she could barely contain. All right. Not sure if that's speaking towards what they just said. I'm not sure any of this is speaking precisely towards, maybe in some way, towards the actual original thesis statement. So there's some imprecision going on here. Okay, on the last slide, we left off here. My beautiful literature teacher, Miss Hardman, he's jumping time. Why don't I would just show all the lines so it has a poetic effect so I can read it and really understand and ascertain what you're attempting to argument on behalf of. Who had a secret love for me she could barely contain. Page or line range 48 through 49. This shows that when they focus on a more present topic, then they appear significantly more joyful. I'm not 100% sure it does. When people tend to accept the truth, that's not even a full sentence. And this green line is telling you it's not a full sentence. There's a problem here, right? It's telling you. Um, so pay attention to whatever word in the Word document, whatever it underlines in blue or red or green. The pain that they carried with them for a long period of time will finally ease. People, and this is speaking back towards the simple truth. I know the themes of the simple truth. You could write about themes as well within Black Aperture. You know, these are prominent themes within Black Aperture that Matt Rasmussen, as the poet, intentionally infuses within his collection. And then you enumerate for me, show me the various themes that are in there: loss, mourning, grief. Um, and he's able, and maybe take it a step further. He's able to show these themes through his imagery, his metaphor, his simile, the end effect within the poetry. Remember maybe the last two lines, the last couplets, his end effect. What is he attempting to do with some of these end effects, his last lines of each poem? You know, maybe pick 3 or 4 poems and show me the end effect and what service is that doing? How is it moving? What are the hydraulics? Right? We talk about within elements of poetry, hydraulics. What actually pushes the poem forward? People will finally begin to see at peace. So major formatting issues here. To be at peace. In the simple truth, the narrator begins to feel simplicity of life after they begin to realize they need to release the truth. So some formatting problems here. This whole essay again could have benefited from just revision, walking away from it, writing it, walking away, coming back. Get your eyes, so your eyes are anew, right? And it's new to you. And because invariably in our brains, and inevitably even, we skip over our own writing mistakes because we're so used to them. We know what it means in our own brain, so we skip over them, right? That's why you will have to walk away and come back. In Mirror Image, once Alice realized that her life would not be the same, she felt a wave and acceptance. A wave of acceptance, maybe? A wave and acceptance. Even in the escape, the narrator feels waves of peace. One, I'm guessing they mean once they begin their past experiences. All right, this is now moving into the high D range. Peace starts from accepting past experiences and moving on with your life. Okay, so I believe that's the last paragraph. There's some problems throughout this whole essay with regard to formatting. It would have been pushed into the mid-range C, maybe high C range, had they just went back and sharpened some of the argumentation and revised some of the sentences that have some formatting issues. Okay, here we are. Final page of the essay. So there was 3 pages of prose within the essay, and then the 4th page that meets the minimum. 3 to 5 pages. That's fine. If your argumentation wasn't strong, does that mean you need to necessarily have more than the minimum? Maybe, to sort of show me that you can eventually get back to a stronger argumentation in page 4 and 5, right? But regardless, this individual student met the minimum. It would have lowered their grade if they had 2 pages of prose and their 3rd page was the works cited. Their grade would have been lower than a D. Possibly they didn't meet the standard, the threshold, which was three pages at that point. But they did meet the standard within this example. And then they have the works cited page. That has to be your last page, right? That you tack on the last page after you meet the minimum or the maximum. And I'm not going to take off if you go exceed 5 pages, just as long as you don't meander off into 10 pages or something crazy like that. Where it's not tight argumentation at that point. It's a research paper at that point. So the works cited, as we see here, is not. We don't use the colon, right? It's just work, and it should be plural, works cited, right? It should be centered. That you got that right. It is Times New Roman. So you got that right as well. It's the right size. It's 12-point font. So that's correct as well. But no colon. It needs to be plural. These look sort of okay. They're in alphabetical order as your works cited should be, right? Everything that this individual accessed within their essay, within their in-text citations, they're mentioning here. So Lena Coakley, Mirror Image. There's some information missing here. The Mirror Image was a short story, so it's not going to be published by itself. It's going to be part of a larger collection, an anthology probably. So he's missing that part. The Simple Truth, that's sort of the bare bones. I would accept that. That's fine. And then the Escape is from the Simple Truth. So it should be the Simple Truth, and then the Escape should be in quotation marks because it's an individual poem. And if he's talking about the Simple Truth as a poem, it should be the Simple Truth, italicized, the book, and then right here should be the simple truth, the poem in quotation marks to show me that he's talking about the simple truth from the simple truth, right? I know it's kind of confusing when you have the same name from the as a poem from the collection of the same name. Um, yeah, so there's some problems. There's basic formatting is correct, but there's some specific formatting problems, MLA problems with his works cited. Okay, so here's a link to Matt Rasmussen reading from Black Aperture. I think he reads like 3 or 4 poems from it. So it's always good to sort of, I mean, you can hear me read it, you can read it and hear the echoes of your own reading in your head or aloud. But it's always nice to hear the poet actually read his or her own work. So I would implore you, and this might help you jog some sort of thought process with regard to what you want to write about. If you haven't chosen already what you want to write about, this might help you. And so go ahead and listen to it. I think it's six or 7 minutes long. It really gives you a sense of his voice as opposed to just sort of seeing it on the page, but actually listening to it. Uh, and then maybe it'll give you some insight, more insight than just reading the poem, right? And as always, any questions you might have, email me if you have any inquiries with regard to anything we've covered thus far, or a question concerning your short essay, which is due by midnight on Monday of next week. Also, remember to comment on Black Aperture, the discussion that I posted on Blackboard. You have until midnight as well to comment there. Okay, let me know if you have any concerns or questions. Email me. And remember, next week we're starting the poetry collection by Brian Turner called Here Bullet, about his experiences within, I think it's Iraq and Afghanistan, being deployed there within the U.S. Army. Um, that if you haven't gotten the book yet, it can be obtained online. The ebook on for Kindle, I think it's for $9.99. That's the way I'm going to do it. I left my book in my office in Medicine at College, and I'm not willing to drive down there to get it. So I'm going to review the online version for Monday, for our lecture on Monday. Okay, take care. See you next week. Bye, guys.